I certainly think you need to keep your eye on the fact that improvements are really happening to people at the bottom of the distribution. And that's a focus on poverty gives that to you. But even there, so generally I come down on behalf of the inequality side of the debate for a few reasons. One, we're all in this together. And South African society in particular, the processes that perpetuate the poverty are processes, they're the very same processes that explain what's going on at the top end of the income distribution. So I don't think it's that useful in a sustainable policy-making framework to focus on poverty alleviation. It tends to just say, okay, we pay our taxes to government and we're done. You know, government must use it to alleviate poverty. Whereas the whole social relationship in which policy needs to operate requires a much more nuanced understanding of how the society actually works as a whole. I think that's the big argument in favor of inequality and inequality focus. And the fact that if there's one country in the world where inequality hits you in the face, literally, you come to Cape Town, which is where I live. You can, to quote Gary Fields, you can smell the inequality. Now, that's not, when it smells that bad, that's not a constructive environment for a society as a whole. Well, inclusive employment has proved elusive. Extremely elusive because government can't just do it. So we've discussed public works programs. The public sector employment has grown hugely in South Africa and has to some extent masked what's really happened in the private sector. So the informal sector is an important part of that. A few things about that. One, recognizing it for one. You know, we've got a very strongly regulated, a very good set of labor relations that protect workers' rights and also define bargaining. That tends to formalize, to take the discussion towards the formal side of the labor market. I don't think that that's helpful because the poor are grubbing around trying to eke out a living in the informal sector and getting locked in huge debates that are right at the interface of the formal and informal sector and wage bargaining and things just rules that out. We've got to understand those livelihoods and start dealing with them very concretely. For example, in a sense that in the urban areas, many of the poorest of the poor live in informal settlements. There's very little discussion in South Africa about the economy of informal settlements. There are no big businesses trying to get in there. You're not shutting out anybody else's employment creation by trying to create the environment in which these informal settlements can also become informal economies, of a sense. It's just respectful of the people who have to live in the most dire circumstances. So I think that's an important part of the inclusivity discussion. And then obviously government infrastructure and big picture things that don't just look to provide wonderful world-class pipelines for synthetic fuels, but also look to provide real goodies to people who are battling to live. Good public transport, for example, is enormously important, I think. Also, personally, UNU-WIDER has always done the type of work that I do. They were around a long time before I was around, you know, as an academic working in these areas, and they've always had this focus on poverty. Sure, that's in their mission statement, but inequality too, and the wider database. In a sense, like many decades before everybody was trumpeting the importance of inequality, WIDER were working away on inequality issues and putting it on the table. So there's this resonance. So for me personally, I get involved in projects that do what I do. It's a perfect fit. It's always a privilege, you know. You work on, generally I work in South African case studies on things like inflation and the income distribution, or inflation and the poor. the labour market and inequality. This is what I do. Then I can come into a wider context in which they're running a project with many country studies like that around the world. The wider methodology, I think, is one of paying attention to the detail and extrapolating from there outwards. And so, for example, their database, which you think, oh no, but their database is aggregate, encouraging cross-country empirical analysis without attention to the detail. That's just not true at all. It's very, very carefully derived from local, country things. So that mesh for me, I then get to take back to South Africa lessons from around the world. My perspective gets freshened up. South Africans and myself, we can be very, very insular, and so you listen to people and you think, well, I wasn't even thinking about that. Like I was quite uncomfortable answering some questions about the informal sector. I think South Africans we don't know a lot about policies to promote informal work, even if it's towards formalization. Yes, sure, that's great. But what do you do? Well, if you get in a room with a bunch of African scholars, and you will hear lots about that. This is what they focus on all the time.